To our classmates, future educators, and most especially to our beloved instructor in L115, Survey of English and American Literature, Ma'am Roxanne Duwat, a pleasant day to everyone. Today, we will present and discuss with you the timeline of British American literature as our assigned topic, and also discuss with you the important points of the literature Beowulf in all its episodes. So, despite our very super hectic schedule, I know that we are all drained, but I hope that we still continue to choose to continue no matter what. Dahil lang jud ta og sabay ta ninyong malahutay. So, there we go. I want you to listen carefully and jot down things that you may think are important and no longer seen in the presentation. I hope that you write them down in your notes, and of course, I hope that you are in a safe situation as you listen to this discussion. That is why we also made this pre-recorded video that was advised by our instructor for you to listen to wherever you are, or repeatedly view it when there are things you want to go back and listen to again. I want you to focus on, because this would be very useful, especially since literature is really that complex and we want to know when English literature started. So aside from this is also included in our upcoming examination, but the inclusion of the discussion is only those we think are most important, because medyo madugay pa ta if we will dig deeper jud kada isa, as we all know that literature is again really that complex. So let's start. So I know that we are together in a couple of years, but allow me to introduce again. I am Rachel Jane Imalogianes, your classmate and assigned reporter in this session, together with my co-reporter Ate Mary Crisuncad, who will also give her insights later. So welcome to our virtual discussion, and without further ado, let's get started. So at the end of this discussion, you should be able to trace the timeline of British American literature. Second, identify some notable writers and their works. And lastly, discuss the significance of Beowulf in literature. We have here first is the classical period. Running from roughly 12 BCE to 455 CE, the classical period was home to the great works of ancient Greece and Rome. You'll sometimes see the words Greco-Roman or antiquity used to refer to this millennia-old period. The classical period was really a golden age for literature. The term isn't just limited to novels, but it can also include epic, lyric, tragedy, comedy, pastoral, and other forms of writing. The study of these texts was once considered to be a necessity for students of the humanities. Classical literature also refers to the great masterpieces of Greek, Roman, and other ancient civilization, which we will be discussing now. The first ancient civilizations we have are the Homeric or heroic period from 12 to 800 BCE, where Greek legends are passed along orally, including Homer's, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. I know that we are all familiar when we hear Iliad and Odyssey, since if you have still remember, this has been discussed in our secondary years. Iliad and Odyssey is the two major ancient Greek epic poems attributed to Homer that is one of the oldest extant works of literature and is still widely read by modern audiences. Then again, it is composed independently, and that the stories formed as part of the long oral tradition. This is also a chaotic period of warrior princes, wandering sea traders, and fierce pirates. The second one under classical period is the Greek period from 800 to 200 BCE. The ancient Greeks pioneered, developed, and in fact, named many familiar genera of world literature: epic, lyric, and pastoral poetry, tragic and comic drama, prose, history, philosophy, and the novel all have deep roots in the literature of ancient Greece. The Greeks did this despite not having adopted a writing system capable of recording these literary forms until relatively late in their cultural history. Classical Greek is one of the professional classicists' most powerful tools for identifying and analyzing culturally significant texts, events, objects, and ideas. Greek writers, playwrights, and philosophers such as Gorgias, Aesop, Plato's Dialogues, Socrates, Aristotle's treatises on ethics, politics, and physics, Euripides and Sophocles' Oedipus, The King, that were all written originally in Greek over 2,000 years ago. The 5th century, 499 to 400 BCE in particular, is renowned as the Golden Age of Greece. This is the sophisticated period of the polis, or individual city-state, and early democracy. Some of the world's finest art, poetry, drama, architecture, and philosophy originate in Athens. The third one is the classical Roman period from 200 BCE to 455 CE. Greece's culture gives way to Roman power when Rome conquers Greece in 146 CE. The Roman Republic was traditionally founded in 509 BCE, but it is limited in the size until later. The ancient Roman literature was written in the Latin language, and it maintains an enduring legacy of ancient Rome, its culture, and its people. Playwrights of this time include Plautus and Terence, and after nearly 500 years as a republic, Rome slid into dictatorship under Julius Caesar, and finally into a monarchical empire under Caesar Augustus in 27 CE, and this later period is known as the Roman Imperial period. Roman writers include Ovid, Horace, and Virgil. Roman philosophers included Marcus Aurelius and Lucretius, and Roman rhetoricians included Cicero and Quintilian. The last period under classical is the Patristic Period from c. 70 AD to 455 CE. Body of literature that comprises these works, excluding the New Testament, written by Christians before the 8th century. It refers to the works of the Church Fathers. Most patristic literature is in Greek or Latin, but much survives in Syriac and other Middle Eastern languages. Early Christian writings such as Saint Augustine, Tertullian, Saint Cyprian, Saint Ambrose, and Saint Jerome. This is the period in which Saint Jerome first compiled the Bible, when Christianity spread across Europe and the Roman Empire suffered its dying convulsions. In this period, barbarians attack Rome in 410 AD, and the city finally falls to them completely in 455 CE. After classical period, next is the medieval period. The majority of books from the Middle Ages were written in what is known as Middle English, though French and Latin were also used for law and the church respectively. Spelling and grammar were inconsistent in these early writings, which can make them hard to read. It wasn't until the invention of the printing press in 1410 that spelling began to be standardized. Much of the early literature of this period consists of sermons, prayers, lives of saints, and homilies. Under medieval period is the Old English Anglo-Saxon Period in 428 to 1066. The so-called Dark Ages occur when Rome falls and barbarian tribes move into Europe. Franks, Ostrogoths, Lombards, and Goths settle in the ruins of Europe, and the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes migrate to Britain, displacing native Celts into Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Early Old English poems such as Beowulf, The Wanderer, and The Seafarer originate sometime late in the Anglo-Saxon period. The second one under medieval period is the Middle English period from c. 1066 to 1450. The Middle English period begins sometime after the Norman conquest of England in 1066, the Battle of Hastings. The language can safely be called Middle by the year 1300. While difficult to read more modern speakers of English, one can usually make something of a Middle English text without formal linguistic study, though there are subtleties of grammar and vocabulary that repay close linguistic attention. This often tumultuous period is marked with the Middle English writings of Geoffrey Chaucer, Boccaccio, Petrarch, Dante, Christine de Pizan, the Gawain or Pearl Poet, the Wakefield Master, and William Langland. Other writers include Italian and French authors like Boccaccio, Petrarch, Dante, and Christine de Pizan. After medieval period, next is the Renaissance period from c. 1485 to 1660 CE. The Renaissance takes place in the late 15th, 16th, and early 17th century in Britain, but somewhat earlier in Italy and the southern Europe, somewhat later in northern Europe. The English Renaissance is an era of cultural revival and poetic evolution, starting in the late 15th century and spilling into the revolutionary years of the 17th century that stands as an early summit of poetry achievement, the era in which the modern sense of English poetry begins. This era influenced its enduring traditions, inspiring experiments, and seemingly unsurpassable heights that reverberate today. The term Renaissance, deriving from the French for rebirth, is a name retroactively bestowed by 19th century thinkers who distinguished the era by its revivals, a renewed interest in ancient languages, the recovery of antique manuscripts, and the return to the classical ideals underlying the era's defining intellectual movement. Under Renaissance is the early Tudor period from 1485 to 1558. At this time, England underwent huge changes due to the reigns of 3 generations of Tudor dynasty monarchs. Henry VIII ushered in new state religion, and the increasing confidence of the state coincided with the growth of a distinctively English culture. The War of the Roses ends in England with Henry Tudor, Henry VII claiming the throne. Martin Luther's split with Rome marks the emergence of Protestantism, followed by Henry VIII's Anglican Schism, which creates the first Protestant church in England, and Edmund Spenser is a sample poet. Next we have is the Elizabethan period from 1558 to 1603. The Elizabethan literature, body of works written during the reign of Elizabeth I of England, in probably the most splendid age in the history of English literature. The Elizabethan age saw the flowering of poetry, the sonnet, the Spenserian stanza, dramatic blank verse, and was a golden age of drama, especially for the plays of Shakespeare, and inspired a wide variety of splendid prose, from historical chronicles, versions of the Holy Scriptures, pamphlets, and literary criticism to the first English novels. Queen Elizabeth saves England from both Spanish invasion and internal squabbles at home. Her reign is marked by the early work of Shakespeare, Marlowe, Kidd, and Sidney. From about the beginning of the 17th century, a sudden darkening of tone became noticeable in most forms of literary expression, especially in drama, and a change more or less coincided with the death of Elizabeth. The other one is the Jacobian period from 1603 to 1625. Jacobian literature was a body of works written during the reign of James I of England. The successor to Elizabethan literature was Jacobean literature, and the work was often dark and mood, questioning the stability of the social order, and some of William Shakespeare's greatest tragedies may date from the beginning of the period, and other dramatists, including John Webster, were often preoccupied with the problem of the evil. The era's comedy included the acid satire of Ben Jonson. Jacobean poetry included the graceful verse of Jonson and the Cavalier poets, but also the intellectual complexity of the metaphysical poetry of John Donne and others. In prose, writers such as Francis Bacon and Robert Burton showed a new toughness and flexibility of style. The era's monumental prose achievement was the King James Version of the Bible. The last one under Renaissance is the Caroline Age. The word Caroline comes from the name Charles, which is the King of England from 1625 to 1649. During this period, poetry was divided into 3 categories: metaphysical, Cavalier, and Puritan. So let us have a short overview about the 3. Metaphysical poetry is marked by the use of elaborative figurative languages, original conceits, paradoxes, and philosophical topics. John Donne is the best-known metaphysical poet. His poetry is often cited as the best example of this movement. One of the most prominent characteristics of this movement is the spoken quality of the poetry, something that many other writers of that time did not approve of. Other common features include the use of colloquial diction, philosophical exploration, new and original conceits, irony, and the relaxed use of the meter. Poets who were part of this movement were often seeking answers to questions like, does God exist? And is humanity really free? Something like that. Next is the Cavalier. The Cavalier poets were a group of writers from the 17th century in England. They are generally refined by their class and the fact that they originated from that which supported Charles I during the English Civil War. Sometimes the Cavalier poets were looked down on because they created the art that King Charles was interested in and often worked in his service. Poets of this movement include Robert Herrick, Thomas Carr, and Richard Lovelace. The last one is Puritan. It began in England in the 17th century. The poets who were part of this movement did not agree with the use of a great deal of figurative language like metaphors and refrained from using overly poetic language. Some of the best-known Puritan poets are John Milton, Anne Bradstreet, and John Dryden. And now, we are down to the later periods of literature. These periods are spans of time in which literature shared intellectual, linguistic, religious, and artistic influences. In the Western tradition, the later periods of the literary history are roughly as follows below. We have the Enlightenment, Neoclassical period from c. 1660 to 1790. Neoclassical refers to the increased influence of classical literature upon these centuries. The Neoclassical period is also called the Enlightenment due to the increased reverence for logic and disdain for superstition. The period is marked by the rise of deism, intellectual backlash against earlier Puritanism, and America's revolution against England. Under of it is the Restoration period from c. 1660 to 17. The Restoration is a period in literary history full of humor and hanky-panky. Checking right, we thought dudes that looked like this would be super uptight, but no. The most popular writers of the age wrote bawdy comedies packed with sexual innuendo. These writers loved to satirize social manners, sexual codes, and the social classes of their day. They were lusty and snarky, a dynamic combo if ever there was one. This period marks the British king's restoration to the throne after a long period of Puritan domination in England. Its symptoms include the dominance of French and classical influences on poetry and drama. Sample writers include John Dryden, John Locke, Sir William Temple, and Samuel Pepys, and Alfred Ben in England. Abroad, representative authors from France include Jane Racine and Molière. The second one is the Augustan Age from c. 1700 to 1750. The Augustan Age was also marked by the evolution of satirical verse, the development of the novel, and the use of melodrama over political satire. The Augustan Age was also noted for the changes in philosophical thought. For example, the formalization of capitalism. The writing during this period was highly regulated and stylized, but the borders of the movement are unclear, meaning scholars are undecided on when exactly it begins and ends. But the literature produced during the reign of Queen Anne, King George I, and George II is considered part of the literary period. This period is marked by the imitation of Virgil and Horace literature in English letters. The principal English writers include Addison, Steele, Swift, and Alexander Pope. Abroad, Voltaire is the dominant French writer. And last under Enlightenment is the Age of Johnson from c. 1750 to 1790. The Age of Johnson, often referred to as the Age of Sensibility, because it is the period in English literature that ranged from the middle of the 18th century until 1790. Writers of the Age of Johnson focused on the qualities of intellect, reason, balance, and order. The Age of Sensibility is marked by works that focus more directly on anti-classical features of old ballads and new bardic poetry. These writers began to embrace new forms of literary expression. This period marks the transition toward the upcoming Romanticism, though the period is still largely neoclassical. Major writers include Dr. Samuel Johnson, Boswell, and Edward Gibbon, who represent the neoclassical tendencies, while writers like Robert Burns, Thomas Gray, Cowper, and Crabbe show movement away from the neoclassical ideal. In America, this period is called the colonial period because it includes colonial and revolutionary writers like Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine. So that is the end of my part, and for the continuation of this topic, I will give the floor now to Ate Mary Crisangcad.